incorporation is a difficult process to go through sometimes because it's like pregnancy. Once you're it's very difficult to get out of. So, but like pregnancy, it can have some benefits if the baby is wanted and if the parents are not dysfunctional. The agenda that we'll have, we'll talk about the legal implications, the tax implications, the types of incorporations you can have, the procedures for incorporating, and what you do after you incorporate. A lot of my clients and a lot of the people I know think that incorporating is doing the articles of incorporation, getting the seal, and that's it. And a lot of people don't understand that that's like a marriage certificate. It's not the marriage, it's a certificate. You still need to be blessed by somebody. And that's called a minute book. And usually that happens when you have more than one person. Because a corporation, you become a shareholder, you have to issue shares, you have to do all that kind of stuff. So all of that happens in the minute book, not when you incorporate. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the requirements that you need to have for maintaining the corporation. So there, just before we talk about incorporation, there are three types of businesses you can have. And I'm not going to be talking today about nonprofits because nonprofits are their own type of world. So this is just for profit-oriented businesses. And in Ontario, you can have, basically three. A proprietorship, which is what some of you have. A partnership, which is somebody here might be in, and an incorporation. A proprietorship is a very simple business owned by one person. You don't need to register it. You don't need permission from anybody. The only time you register it sometimes is if you want a business account from the bank. They might want you to have a registration form, or if you are using a name other than yours, and you need to have that name registered. The Ministry of Government and Consumer Services will give you that ability. But of course, that costs money. But for proprietorships, it will cost probably 60, 70 bucks to do that. The name can be different. The name can, like if you want a name and you want to safeguard that name, that could be pretty expensive. Because that's very different to incorporation. That goes into patents and copyrights. But you can ask me any questions on that, and I'll be happy to answer it. The advantages of forming a proprietorship: it's easy. You don't have arguments in distributing the money you make. If you do, you have psychiatric problems. You don't have business problems, and the owner has total complete control. You have personal commitment. But you have lack of management skills because the management skills are limited by you. There's no one else but you. And there's a lack of continuity. And by that, we mean that when the proprietor dies, the business dies with him or her. So, and that's something that incorporation prevents, that die-off. Partnerships are for people who are not thinking properly. Because if you have a partnership with another person, I don't mean with a spouse or a child of yours, but with a stranger, you need to have much more controls than if you were incorporated. And a partnership is cemented with a partnership agreement and with a buy and sell agreement. A buy and sell agreement is known as a shotgun clause. And a shotgun clause is when if I have a partner, and I realize that my partner is under financial difficulties or going through a divorce, I may be tempted to say, well, I'll buy your share for 50 bucks. And the shotgun clause says, if you do that, your partner has the right to automatically offer you 50 bucks for your half. So it's almost like having a gun on each other's head, and to prevent that from happening. but you need a good lawyer, and you need to have an airtight shareholder agreement, partnership agreement rather. Partnership are easy to start. You tend to combine resources, and you tend to have better management skills. But all of the disadvantages of being a proprietor apply in a partner, because you are both severally liable for the actions of the partnership. In other words, if something happens in the business and your partner runs away, by running away, that doesn't mean that half of the liability left. The liability is still with you here. You tend to share the income as a management. You don't make as much, and there is high potential for management disagreement. Partners tend to have high potential because we are very unreasonable people sometimes as human beings. We get into partnership with someone at 30, and at 55, we are upset that they have changed, that in those 25 years they have changed and they have other requirements. You know, I think that we would not demand of our families and our spouses. We sometimes want to demand of our partners. So that tends to create problems in the past. Now, I've gone pretty fast on those two forms because we're not talking here about you know, small unincorporated businesses. We're concentrating more on how to incorporate. A corporation has its own legal existence and responsibilities, unlike a proprietorship that is limited by the time the owner is alive. A corporation is alive forever if you want, provided you behave. And it can consist of one or more shareholders. The advantages of being incorporated is that you can raise capital better. You know, it's easier to get investment because it's easier to split a corporation by giving shares. And shares don't necessarily mean that you're giving away management or control, because there are different kinds of shares. You have limited liability in that what the business does, you're not responsible for, but I'll get back to that in a moment. And there's continuity, which means that the company lives after you have gone. And many of us go to businesses that have been there for 100 years. Well, that doesn't mean that the shareholders who started it 100 years ago are still there, but the business is still there because the corporation is still there. General Electric is a good example. General Electric, you know, if the present General Electric first president was still there, it would be 135 years old. So he's not there anymore. So as a result, you know, it's easier to keep going. The disadvantage of being incorporated, and I heard a bit of an echo in this through the introductions. It's more complex to create. It has more legal requirements, and it costs more money to incorporate than it does to start a partnership or a proprietorship. It just the government fee alone is $360, and you may have to pay someone else to do it for you. So it could run you sometimes from $700 to $2,000. Now, what makes the price difference is not really the corporation itself, but the people involved in it. A one-person corporation can be done by one person very easily with very little time involved in it and just paying the government fees. But if you have 5 or 6 partners who are going to incorporate, the first thing you need to do is have independent legal advice, and you need to have a shareholder agreement. And that can get costly. Now, choosing a company's name is part of the reason why people incorporate, because by choosing the name, you tend to safeguard that name. And in Ontario, that is in Canada, rather, that is done through a nuance report. And a nuance report is there's a body there who has a database of all the names, And let's say you want to incorporate, ABC Consulting. So you submit the name of ABC Consulting, and they will tell you whether you can use it or if there's anybody else with ABC Consulting there. And if there is, the government will not incorporate you. So you may have to find a variation to ABC Consulting. Some names are almost impossible to have, and sometimes people get discouraged. So but that doesn't mean you cannot incorporate. If you don't have a name, the government can give you one, and that doesn't cost anything extra. And those are the people you know as 12345 Ontario Limited or 752 whatever Canada Inc. You don't need to provide a nuance report because it's a government number, so nobody says it doesn't exist, and it's done by people who want to have a quiet business in the back, even though they may have a trade name. And a trade name is very different to a corporate name. A trade name could be, ABC, like it could be ABC Restaurants or, Maple Street Restaurants. That's your trade name. That name could be owned by 12345 Ontario Limited. And the public just knows the name of the restaurant. So you don't need to worry about the name. If you have a numbered company, you can always have a registered name. Now, getting back to what I was saying earlier, that registered name costs money. You need to safeguard it. You need to register it, and sometimes you need to have very deep pockets to defend it. There is business schools are full of examples of how important a name is, and how little care we take sometimes in protecting it or in thinking that it's all right, or in signing off something. In the 19th century, a small Polish brewing company sold its North American rights of the name Budweiser to this German family in St. Louis called Anheuser-Busch. And they had the name Budweiser. And they made beer, and over time the Budweiser in the US became a very big brand, very, very big name, and very, very popular in this market. But as the world became a bigger trading group, and as we got globalized, Budweiser got the idea that they could sell Budweiser beer in Europe. And they went to Europe and they put Budweiser beer in Europe. And this was in the 1980s, prior to the Iron Curtain falling down. So in the 1980s, they put that beer, and this little brewer in Poland is still there, and it brought its agreement with Anheuser-Busch, and he said, "You cannot sell beer here." Anheuser-Busch said, "Yeah, but that Polish company really doesn't exist anymore because you're a communist country." So it went to The Hague, to the International Court of Justice, and there, Anheuser-Busch said, "Well, it doesn't exist," and the court ruled a name is a name is a name. That brewing company is still there, so yes, you can use Budweiser in Europe, but every time you sell a bottle of beer, you have to give X amount of percent to this company in Poland. And that's the importance of a name. You never give it away, or you never sign it off, because if you do, you never know what the repercussions that can come in the future. And I know that because I went to school with people, with three guys in my university class, who spend their day thinking of names and registering them. And when I went to university, it was free to register a name. And they would register these names, and then they will wait for one of us to start a business with it. And they would let us go for a while, and then they would send us a letter saying, the name is available for X amount of money. So in many ways, the people who get into trouble with names have very painful stories to tell. Now, when I talk about a one-person corporation, I'm also talking a family in business. It's still a one-person corporation. There's a difference between a one-person corporation, or you being in business with your spouse or your kids, and a corporation that is owned by 4 or 5 other people that are shareholders. So a one-person corporation is relatively easy to start. You need a nuanced report, you need the articles of incorporation, and 1 and 2 is what most people get. Then and sometimes Form 1 for Ontario is not, if you're doing your own incorporation, it doesn't get done, which means that Ontario doesn't know who you are really from a ownership point of view. So then you do, but in reality you should do Form 1, and you need a minute book, and a minute book is how you split the business. Who's the shareholders? How do we divide the business? Who is going to get paid? Am I going to give my spouse dividends, or am I making the dividends? Am I going to sprinkle those dividends among my adult children, or am I going to make all of the money? So tax planning is better. It used to be fantastic up until 2017. And in 2017, the government changed the rules to make that tax planning more challenging. So, but in the minute book also talks about the issuance of shares. Now, the other thing that happens in a corporation is the transferring of assets that were not part of the corporation. So let's say if you own a truck and you're a proprietor, and you want to put the truck in the company's name, there are provisions in the Tax Act for those transfers to happen without it causing you trouble from a taxation point of view. The corporation with more than one person, my advice is you need a corporate lawyer, you need a shareholder agreement. That can be a tedious process. I have clients who are incorporated and they're a food company, they're 5 owners, and the shareholder agreement section took 3 months to get done. Because once they put things in writing, the other person did not like it and they had to change it and so on. So it's a tedious thing, but the absence of having a shareholder agreement is murder. It's lethal. You don't have one, you are in for a rough time. One more person incorporating is the same process, except the shareholder agreement is more complicated. Taxation. People when they look at a corporation, they tend sometimes to look at the difference in tax as being primarily the main reason to incorporate. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be because there's other reasons, that a company gives you benefits in. But a lot of people look primarily at incorporating because of taxation. And the taxation of a company depends on the type of corporation you are, the source of income, and I'm going to get back to that a little bit better, because that's what the government has attacked in the last 2 years, the source of income, the timing of its distribution to shareholders, which means when do you pay those dividends, and the relationship between the corporation and its shareholders. In other words, who owns what here? Who am I paying? Am I paying Class C shares or Class B shares, or am I paying everybody? Now, the tax rates of a company are very, very different to your own personal tax rates. In Ontario, for 2020 and 20, this should be 2021, not 2011, sorry. For 2020 and 2021, in Ontario, the rate is 12.2%. Now, the lowest tax rate we have for a person in Ontario is around, I would say, 20%. So you're already paying more money on the same amount of money. Now, the other thing that you need to remember is a corporation pays 12.2% on the first $500,000 of net income. You pay 20% on the first $15,000 of net income. So you're not even in the same ballpark as a as a tax in a tax situation when it comes to incorporation. If it's going to make money, it's going to cost you a lot of money in tax. This is just an example of what you save on a range of $48,000 to $95,000 in net income in a proprietorship as opposed to a corporation. And the more this goes, the more money you save. So in this case, it's like $4,000 almost that you save by being incorporated. Now, when to incorporate? If you are a proprietor now and you want to incorporate, I would do it at a time when my business is losing the most amount of money from a tax point of view, because tax losses in a proprietorship cannot be transferred to a corporation. But if you have, let's say you leave the government and you have a payout, and then you start a consulting job, in the first 6 months you're not doing that much work, so you lose money. That loss is better inside your personal tax than it is in the corporation. And the last thing I will say is that, and that's something we do here quite often, is doing Section 85 rollovers. And that is when we transfer assets to a corporation. And what we do there is skirt the capital gains rules by allowing the owners to transfer assets without claiming a capital gain.